Good evening, and you're all very welcome to this evening's webinar, which is being brought to you tonight by the Teagasc advisory staff here in County Mayo. My name is Brendan Gary. I work in Teagasc and Ballinrobe, and tonight, for the next hour, I'm delighted to be your host for this webinar on this Tuesday evening. Now, this evening's webinar is the second episode in a new four-part series of webinars, which will run for the next few weeks, each Tuesday evening at 8 p.m, and the same link will work for each episode. Now, during this new series, we will cover some key agricultural issues facing Irish farmers in 2025, and tonight will be no different. Now, tonight we will look at two different topics, but ones which are of interest to livestock farmers right across the countryside. And the first topic tonight will be a presentation by Dr Damien Barrett, Head of Ruminant Animal Health Programs with the Department of Agriculture. And Damien is going to talk to us tonight and give us an update on TB. While later, Ronan Mulligan, Teagasc Dairy Advisor based in Teagasc in Claremorris, and Ronan is going to provide us with an update on the latest nitrate regulations and will provide us on an indication of what might be included in the next nitrates action plan. Now, you, the viewers this evening at home, are being encouraged to engage with our speakers here tonight, and we ask you to type your questions into the Q&A button at the bottom of your phones, screens, or tablets. And later this evening, my colleague Pádraig Welch from Teagasc Ballina will put your questions live to our panelists. So please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. As always, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available to watch back on the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel in the coming days. So without further delay, I'll now ask you, Damien, to start sharing your presentation with us, and it's over to you now, Damien.
Thanks very much, Brendan, for the invitation to speak to your clients this evening. Just to make sure that I'm the right screen is there for you. Am I on? Is that the update screen?
That's perfect, Damien. Now it's perfect, ready to go now. And
okay,
over
thanks.
to you now.
Well, as you're aware, there's been a substantial increase in TB figures for the last while, and in the last few weeks there seems to be a bit of a turn. But at the same time, from the next slide, you'll see that we're well ahead of where we've been. But I just want to highlight one figure here because I'm going to be making reference to it later. Is the figure here of the confirmed slaughterhouse cases, and this is the level. These are TB factory lesions found in cattle coming from unrestricted herds, and we look at that as a measure of the background level of TB in the population. That has increased substantially over the last few years, and that's telling us that that the disease that's not necessarily detected but out there. If we look at the herd incidence over the last while, you'll see there in 2025 it has started to decline, but it's a bit like all sorts of prices. When they come up, they won't come back down without an intervention, and that intervention will be in the form of the TB action plan that the minister announced a few weeks ago. Now, a few things of interest to note. In mid 2024, there was quite an acceleration in the herd incidence levels, and that continued on well into Q2 of 2025, and it's only now on the decline. Now, as you can see, we're well ahead of 2023 and indeed 2022. Now, I put this slide in here for Mayo and the surrounding counties, just to say where Mayo and the surrounding counties sit in the national picture. The herd incidence in Mayo is about 2.66%, and it's been bubbling along that all year, compared to the national incidence there in red. In Galway, it's round the 4, just around the 4%. It's been round that all year. Sligo, it's declined from about 5.5% to 4.25% at this stage, and in Galway it's been around the 4%. The 4%. So the western counties are the herd incidence is relatively low in comparison to the national trend. But what this doesn't really say, or what this isn't really highlighting, is that while the national overall herd incidence has been at 6%, the herd incidence in dairy herds is of the order of about 20%. And so that's 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 of concern. Now, just to see where we are there last March compared to June of 2022, you'll see that there's been quite a substantial increase. Reactor numbers have doubled, and like that's actually where the big costs to all parties involved in this, be it farmers or the taxpayer, is in the loss of reactor cattle. Just to put it in context where this is, last year we had over 41,500 reactors. But if we go back to 2018, that's increased from about 17,500. So this has been very, very substantial. Now, in terms of the demographics, the types of cattle, this has been steadily increasing in among dairy cattle as the demographics of the national dairy herd has changed. Now, this next slide, I want to highlight particularly the bottom line. And the bottom line is the rate of factory lesions among cattle coming from unrestricted herds. And that you'll see has gone from 0.87 in 2019 to 1.62 in 2024. Now that essentially means that the background level of TB in the population in the overall system has doubled, and the detection of TB by way of skin tests hasn't kept pace with that. So that is, and as I see later on, this continued spread is how it has taken off. So this background level has increased by between 13 and 14% year on year since 2019. Herd incidence actually fell in 2022. I don't think that the 22 figures really isn't reflective of the true disease picture. Breakdown size has increased, and that's telling us there's more cattle-to-cattle transmission. What we found as well is that residual infection, that is infection from disease retained in a herd, has assumed a greater importance as herd size has increased, and the herd sizes has the abolition of milk quotas has been the primary driver in that. We've got more dairy herds. We've got dairy herds in areas where there weren't previously dairy herds moving into tillage and suckler areas. The herd sizes are bigger. There's increased cattle movements. There's about 500,000 more cattle movements per annum than there was 5 years ago. And our residual infection model has shown that long-term residency is a very significant risk factor for the occurrence of TB. Now, long-term residency in layman's really means that breeding cows are a greater risk. Now, this piece of research that came from the UK, and we have similar data that's not yet published in an Irish context that's got similar findings. Now, the R0 you remember from COVID is the number of, well, in COVID it was the number of people each infected person infected. In TB it's the number of cattle in a reactor infects. Our understanding of this up until recently was that the R0 for TB was 1.5. And indeed, this study has shown that it is 1.5 in a herd of 30 cattle. However, when you go up to 400 cattle, this approaches 5. So in layman's language, what that means is one reactor infects 5, which in turn infects 25 and can infect 125. And this accounts for why we're seeing bigger breakdowns in bigger herds. What we've also found is that 21% of herds still have infection after de-restriction, and I'll explain that to you later on. And half of recurrent breakdowns were due to the presence of residual infection, and half of those were due to the presence of one animal only. So there's a lot to go on here, and it really is pointing towards the dangers of residual infection. Now, in this slide, I really want to highlight TB, for the most part, in an Irish context, is in a two-host system of badgers and cattle. However, it needs to be made very clear that the spread within species is much greater than the spread between species. The one particular study here that I'm quoting found that the average number of cattle-to-cattle transmission events was 17 times that of badger-to-cattle transmission events, and the average number of cattle and like you'll see likewise that the spread is greater within the badger population than between badgers and cattle, and that's very important. And um, like in a way, you say if the disease is introduced by badgers, and I often say that that could be an event like a fire lighter. If you want to put petrol on the fire, and that is cattle to cattle transmission in this. So whatever the way that the disease is introduced to the herd, cattle to cattle transmission will augment it significantly. Now, in terms of our residual infection model, what that's finding is that herd size, the length of time, the longer a cow is in the herd, and I probably say cows here deliberately because cows are around for the long haul. Beef animals, the bulk of beef animals for fattening, for slaughter, will just see their 30-month birthday. So relatively speaking, they're not around for that long. But the animals that are around for the longer haul, the risk is greater. As we said, the sources of TB, there are three predominant sources: wildlife, purchase, and this is where you'd see an animal failing the first test in the herd, and then residual infection, otherwise known as latent infection, are allergic cattle. These are animals that don't respond to the test for whatever reason. Now, I've kind of mentioned this already about the fire lighter. Now, we've commissioned some interesting research from the University of Wageningen, and the University of Wageningen would be considered the premier infectious disease modeling, veterinary infectious disease modeling group in Europe. And what this has found, what they modeled here was the relative contribution of spread at individual cattle level. And what this study here will concentrate on the high persistence here. And this has concluded that the bulk of transmission at individual cattle level is by cattle. 63% of it are cattle within the herd, 6% of it purchased. The remaining 30% would be related to wildlife. When we look then at a herd level, what this is looking at is sources that introduce the disease to the herd. The first one here is residual infection. The second one is reinfection due to environmental contamination. That's why we're anxious that people carry out a comprehensive cleaning and disinfection program when they're restricted. About 12% there for badgers, almost 10% for purchase, and the remainder a mixture of multiples where it couldn't be disentangled. Now, this thing here, the high persistence, I'm concentrating on that because that's closer to what we deal with in reality. We asked them to model a number of interventions as well to see if we were to if what effect these would have. And so the first one here is we got them to model a number of interventions of wildlife interventions, and the default here is doing nothing. We continue to do the test and removal of infected cattle on its own, and you'll see that's not going to eradicate TB. We then looked at badger vaccination, 50% of the badgers being vaccinated, 100%. Again, that's not going to eradicate TB on its own. Selective culling with these was more effective, but at the same time, badger interventions on their own will not eradicate TB. We asked them then, or they looked at movement restrictions, where we look at something like risk-based trading, pre-movement testing, or a movement ban. Again, all of these on their own wouldn't eradicate TB, but I think what we're seeing here is that when we layer these in together, and that's what the minister has set out in the action plan, is the layering in of these, that they will augment each other. Then the next one here is the improving farm biosecurity, and what that really is measures to block transmission between badgers and cattle, and that in straightforward terms is raising water troughs, fencing offsets, raising feed troughs, that kind of thing, to prevent the transmission pathways, and that has been found to be one of the most significant interventions that can be made. Then this next slide here, what's happening here is all these things are layered in together. So what we have here all along, we're going to have the test and removal. On the bottom as well, we see no intervention and working up to various interventions with the badgers. The next line here, as we move up, improving farm biosecurity, we'll see that thing make things better. Cattle vaccination is here for it's predominantly for academic interest at this stage. It may become more if the vaccine comes on the market. It's in development, but it's taken quite a while to develop. That would be quite a significant game changer, but it's not there yet, so we have to use what we have. If we look then at the trade interventions, risk-based trading and pre-movement testing, what we're looking for here is this green area where the R0 comes in less than 1. This sweet spot is in a combination of risk-based trading and pre-movement testing. The movement ban we'll rule out. That's not going to happen. But and any interventions that we'll be making in terms of the action plan, we'll be targeting those at higher risk animals. Now, in the run up to this, there was a few questions. Brendan asked me to consider a few questions and maybe explain a few things. In terms of the test characteristics, we are dealing with a test that the TB skin test is an imperfect test from the point of view of sensitivity. It's at best it's got an 80% sensitivity, which means 20 out of every 100 reactors may be missed. However, why we roll it out is that when you're testing 7 million cattle per annum, you want to minimize the number of false positives. It's got a specificity of 99.9%, which means that 1 in 5,000 animals are false positives. In terms of the GIFT test, the comparative figures are 93% sensitivity, which means it misses 7 reactors out of every 100. But its specificity is higher, and when you'd apply that over a national population, that would be quite a significant difference. Now, what I want to emphasize here is false negatives are a far bigger problem than false positives. False negatives that remain, that go undetected, they can remain in herds, and it's particularly so in larger herds where you've got susceptible animals there in front of them, that they can like what I referred to earlier on, 5 becoming 25, becoming 125. If these animals are left behind. So what I'm really trying to emphasize here is that it's in everybody's interest to detect infection earlier. And I fully understand that a TB restriction is an inconvenience. And you may well say that's quite an understatement. I fully realize it is, but it's far better to undergo that inconvenience for 2 or 3 animals rather than the disease gaining legs and bigger numbers of reactors being lost. The other question that I was asked to address was that if the animal has doesn't have lesions, it doesn't have TB. And just in the context of what I said earlier on, in terms of a test with the specificity of 99.9%, where 1 in 5,000 is a false positive, that's enough to say it has TB. That's the official test of the European Union. Lesions occur at the end stage. About 40% of reactors have lesions, of skin test reactors have lesions. But what that's at the end stage. Earlier on, say for instance, we get infection, at closer to infection, the gamma interferon test picks them up first. The blood test, then the skin test, then we pick it up at microscopic level on histopathology, and then gross pathology where you see those gross lesions. So the disease is very well advanced by the time the lesions develop. And at that stage, it's far better to detect the disease earlier before it's had an opportunity to spread. So I think I've rattled through that fairly quickly there, but I think that that's more or less what I wanted to say, Brendan. If I don't know, do you want to take questions now or leave them to later?
Yeah, we'll take questions at the very end there, Damien. And look at, I suppose, look, thank you very much there for sharing that presentation with us. Um, definitely some interesting facts there, a lot of useful and practical stats there, and some great measures there you're giving out there. So we'll come back to you at the very end. We'll give you a little break there, and we'll now call on our next speaker, which is Ronan Mulligan. Ronan is a Teagasc Dairy Advisor based in the Teagasc office in Claremorris, and Ronan's going to talk to us tonight on the nitrates regulations and some derogation changes and what's planned maybe possibly for the future, with some decisions yet to be taken, obviously, by the European Commission. But Ronan's going to give us an update. So over to you now, Ronan. And there's still time to put your questions into the Q&A.
Is that
so
okay, Brendan? Can you see that?
That's perfect now, Ronan. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Ronan Mulligan. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the local dairy advisor here in Teagasc Mayo. So basically, just a quick overview of my presentation. And what I'm going to talk about is what is kilos of N per hectare related to. I suppose that whole piece around organic nitrogen versus chemical nitrogen, and just improving farmer understanding around that. So some of the issues affecting farmers, so the issues affecting farmers at various stocking rates from 130 to 170 and exporting, and then your derogation farmers. And then I'm just going to talk about basically what's coming in the near future. So I suppose there's a lot of questions and balls in the air regarding derogation and where it's going to go. So I'm just going to cover a small bit on that and what's possibly going to be in the nutrient action plan come 2026. Okay, so just this year there was a change in animal figures. So basically, up until this point, 0 to 1 year olds were classed as producing 24 kilograms of nitrogen per year. That has changed now, and basically 4 to 12 months are falling into that category of 24 kilos per year. 0 to 3 month old calves are classed in there as producing 1 kilo. So there's a significant, so farmers have benefited from that in terms of organic nitrogen reduction on farms. There's also organic nitrogen reductions for 1 to 2 year old females. So they have dropped down to 55 kilos, and then a 1 to 2 year old male is producing 61 kilograms of organic nitrogen per year. And then a dairy cow, as a lot of you know, we've our bandings there. So our lower band, our cow is at 80 kilograms of nitrogen. Our middle band, our cow is at 92. And our higher band, our cow is producing 106 kilograms of organic nitrogen over the course of the year. And that's obviously dependent on the percentage concentrate that you're feeding throughout the year. Again, I'll touch on that just later on in the presentation. So basically, what is this whole kilograms of nitrogen per hectare about? So it's a different method of expressing stocking rate. So it's basically livestock unit per hectare versus kilograms of organic N per hectare. So if we take an example for a farm here, he's in the middle band. Cows are producing 92 kilograms of N per year, and he also has 24, or he has 4 to 12, a number of 24 to 12 month old animals producing 24 kilograms of nitrogen per year. So he's basically contract rearing out then his older stock. So if you multiply that for it's a 45 hectare farm with 80 cows, 20 weanlings, and to calculate the organic N, we just multiply by 80 cows by 92, and it's 7,360 kilograms of nitrogen. And similarly, we do the same for the young stock. And when we calculate our total kilograms of nitrogen, we divide by the farm hectares, and that will give us where we finish. So it's important that I can't emphasize the importance of consulting your advisor around this whole area of nitrates, because the fines they do seem to be getting heavier every year, especially for repeated breaches on farm. So again, it's very, very easy for farmers to calculate their own stocking rate. So if you within ICBF, and I just wanted to point it out to farmers, there is a nitrates calculator for farmers to just fill in the projected cow numbers for the year. So for just an example up there, so for the rest of the year, this particular farmer is keeping 173 cows. So So basically, we could input them figures, we save the entered values, and then we put in his area from the nitrogen and phosphorus statements on his ag food, and that basically works out where that particular farmer is going to finish in terms of organic N per hectare. And it's just a very, very useful tool that I think farmers need to be using more on farm. So again, just some of the issues that are currently in place that are affecting all farmers. Basically, prevention of direct runoff from farm roadways to water. So there shouldn't be runoff on farms. Water basically is defined as anything that can convey water. So it's anything up to a rip from a dry drain to a river, and it's in place for all farmers, irrespective of stocking rate. And to negate against this, I suppose the advice we have around it is that farmers should camber roadways away from water courses. Again, and a lot of you might know this kind of stuff, but just round bale storage. So the max is too high, and it needs to be a minimum of 20 meters away from any surface waters. No chemical fertilizer can be sprayed within 3 meters of surface waters. And then our slurry spreading deadlines are coming up. In 2026, the permitted date to spread slurry is from the 16th of January. We need to have minimum 18-week storage here in Mayo. And all farmers now above 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare must be spreading slurry using less. We can start spreading chemical fertilizer again from the 30th of January. And then the close period now, that window was very much lengthening out, but from now on it is 1st to the 31st of December. That's our window. We can't spread soil water during that period, and we need to have sufficient soil water for the whole of that period. Okay, so what is new for all farmers? So basically, for perennial ryegrass-based reseeds, there's a mandatory clover inclusion. So clover needs to be included in our grass seed mixes. So that's basically 1.5 kilograms per hectare of naked clover seed, or 2.5 kilograms per hectare of pelleted clover. Unprotected urea. So a lot of you would have got text messages and stuff from the department, but there is a blanket restriction now on the use of normal urea on farm. So that has come into play from the 15th of September. So if you've carried that over as a closing stock, the only way that you'll be able to spread that normal urea is in a liquid form. And if you get an inspection, you will need to show proof that you spread it in a liquid form. So then meal feeding. So this was 15% last year. It's 14% this year. All farmers must feed less than 14% ration between 15th of April to the 30th of September on their farm. And then also another regulation that came in, and this regulation was for 2024 was for farmers that were above 130, but it has come in now for farmers above 100 kilograms of organic N per hectare. So we can't get away with outwintering animals anymore. If you're over 100 kilograms of nitrogen, you need sufficient storage for all the animals on your holding, whether that's in the form of slurry storage or farmyard manure. Again, so just some of the chemical nitrogen limits, and again, it's 2025 in the Nitrates Action Plan is expected to be fairly similar as 2026, but we've yet to fully get that finalized. But just for 2025, the limits were very much based on stocking rate. So as you can see there, if you were stocked at 171 to 210, your chemical nitrogen limit was 241 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. And if you were outside derogation, if you were under 170, that limit dropped to 185 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. The reason being, I suppose, is that the department view you as having less of a requirement for fertilizer, as you're not as highly stocked as in other farmers. I suppose two key things that farmers need to be aware of as well: if you're teetering around that 130, 120 mark in terms of stocking rate, if you fall below 130 in a given year, there is a significant reduction in chemical nitrogen usage on your chemical nitrogen allowance on farm. So that will fall from 185 to 114 if you fall under 130 for this year. And your allowance will be massively reduced for next year. And similarly, if you're in a higher stocking rate band, if you go over 210 and fall in between 211 and 250 kilograms of organic N per hectare, then your allowance drops by roughly 16 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. And on a highly intensive farm, that can be a significant reduction as well. So there definitely is a benefit if you maybe cull a few cows early, or whatever means necessary. Okay. So again, some of the issues that are affecting all farmers. So just basically so initially in 2022, the total kilograms of N in slurry, it was 2.4 kilograms of nitrogen in a meter cube of slurry. From January 2023, that changed to 5. So farmers basically had to export double of what they exported in previous years. And as from January 2025, that 4-day movement rule is now in place. So farmers must notify DAFM within 4 days of a slurry movement taking place. And you can move slurry to tanks. So you can do a slurry movement up now, and you can move it into someone else's tank, provided that farm has enough storage to take the excess slurry. So again, just the banding based on your crude protein percentages. So you can see it there in front of you. So the banding is based off a 3-year average or previous year's figures in terms of milk produced. And you can opt for a lower protein ration in order to reduce the overall organic N from your cows. Now, it is very much worth noting that this is not a mid-season figure, your crude protein percentage. This figure is as a year average. So on the shoulders of the year, a lot of farmers will be feeding 18-20% rations, and that is going to drive your overall average over the 15% mark. But if you're getting a lot of grass in through cows, and you potentially have a lower stocking rate, then this might be something that you could consider if you were teetering around that 170 or 220 mark in order to just bring down your overall figure. So issues affecting those that are stocked at 130 and above. So we basically need soil samples to show your requirement for P. Soil samples are valid. So, but you cannot, if you're stocked above 130 and you have no soil samples, then you cannot spread any P. Soil samples are valid for a 4-year period, and it's a max of 5 hectares per sample area. And samples taken after the 15th of 9, 2022 is what is valid for 2026. And just as well, in Mayo and surrounding counties, Roscommon, Galway, there is a lot of counties affected by the peat layer, by the department's organic matter layer or peat layer. So it's important that before you're taking soil samples that you do consult your advisor. Again, so from Monday, September 15th, there was a new regulation brought in regards to soil sampling. So basically, soil samples now issued after September 14th. So taking soil samples now, basically, it must state the correspondence LIPIS number of that sample, or a georeference or the geo coordinates of the area sampled on the result. So that is something for farmers to very much be aware of. If it is the case that that is not shown for this year's samples or samples taken now, then that particular farmer or the sample will be defaulted to index 4. Again, just to draw people's attention to the organic matter peat layer, and it is important. Again, if you take a soil sample and any part of that sample touches an area of ground in that organic matter peat layer, and an organic matter test hasn't been done, then you're automatically defaulted to index 3 on that sample, regardless of if the sample is 1 or 2. You're defaulted to index 3 on it. So it's, again, something for farmers to be careful of. I know of a number of farmers that have got caught in that scenario where it just went off and got individual soil samples done. It's important that you consult your advisor and make sure that where an organic matter test needs to be done, that it is done. Some of the things that affects farmers that are going above 170 and exporting to get back under it is so what's going to be potentially and probably in the 6th nitrous action plan is basically for farmers going over 170, exporting to go under. They need to implement a liming program. They need to prepare and implement a liming program on their farm. They need to exclusion of bovines from watercourses. So basically fence 1.5 meters from the top of the watercourse. And water troughs need to be set back 20 meters plus from watercourses. But yeah, I just emphasize that new change on that the alignment program needs to be prepared and implemented on the farm. And for derogation, so I suppose there hasn't been too much that has shifted in this. You need to complete compulsory training in sustainability, nutrient use efficiency, and grassland management. So if you've completed that in the past 3 or 4 years, then you're 100%. Compulsory grass measuring and recording. So a lot of farmers forget to do it. So 20 grass measures need to be done per annum on farm, or else that is subject to removal from derogation. They need to complete a number of farm biodiversity measures, so they can either retain mature white or blackthorn trees, or they can cut hedges in rotation. No ploughing of grassland after the 31st of May. 50% of slurry applied must be by the 15th of June. No spreading of livestock manure after the 1st of August prior to reseeding. And also we need to record our closing stocks. There must be adequate storage on farms, and I'll just go into that later regarding some of the changes. There's no importing of slurry allowed, and yeah, just that note that that change in the crude protein content of the meal from 15% back down to 14%. So what's coming down the line, and I suppose this is an important point. So there is a definitive review that has taken place of slurry and soil water storage requirements on farm. So Teagasc were tasked by the department to do a full review on this, and we found that cows were producing a lot more slurry than what was initially put down on paper, in a sense. So basically the cow was 0.33 meters cubed per week, and she is going to go to 0.4 meters cubed per week in terms of slurry production. So that will mean a 20% increase in the storage requirement on farm. So a lot of farms that are compliant now won't be compliant in a number of years' time with very similar stock numbers. So this comes into effect from the 1st of October 2028. So there is a window being given, and I suppose that's why a 60% TAMS grant has come into play, and it's available there for farmers at the moment. Planning permission is required, and what we are telling farmers is you can expect 6 months for approval, or 6 months for planning permission and 6 months for approval. So potentially you could be looking at a year before you go putting in a tank. So and with these regulations coming in on the 1st of October 2028, it is definitely something that we need to get moving on. If you look, for example, at a 6-bay tank there, so just the reference cost in terms of in terms of TAMS, so for that 6-bay tank, the reference cost is almost 30,000. You get slats and slabs covered as well at 60% grant aid, in addition to the tank. And in that 6-bay tank, it's just on the first row, the total cost is estimated around 40,000. So if you take grant aid and everything into account, the total grant that you'll get back is around 34,000. So the cost of that tank will be around 16,000. So to future-proof your farm, basically, the potential cost there to you is 16 grand. And that's obviously excluding that. Okay, and then there is also there's a potential further drop of some areas, and that is from the 1st of December, that some areas will drop from 250 to 220. So basically, what is soil water, and the next bit just kind of covers a little bit on soil water and some of the changes regarding that. So it's water from milking parlours. It's basically from washing down your parlour, and it's from the collecting yard. It's from unroofed temporary holding yards, and it can be run off from silage bases as well. And it's important just to note that rainwater on unroofed feed areas, so if your collecting yard has a feed area on it, or you're feeding animals on it, then it's classed as slurry. And then seepage from manure pits is slurry as well. So again, this is a proposal in the new nutrient action plan so basically at the moment the estimated the production in terms of cows per day, or a cow per day from soil water, is around 30 litres, and that is going to go up to 40 litres per day. So it's going to go up from 0.21 meters cubed per week to 0.3 meters cubed. So it's a significant increase in soil water, and that's going to come into effect from the 1st of October 2028. And again, there's a number of stuff there regarding when tanks were built or whatever, but your soil water production is basically going to be built based on three things. It's going to be based on the maximum number of cows being milked over a 10-day period in October, or the maximum number of cows over a 10-day period in November, or the average number of cows being milked in November. So whatever comes up highest in terms of them three figures, then that's what you're going to use for your soil water calculation. So a lot of tanks that were built pre-2015, and even some of them that were built post-2015, they are going to be non-compliant in a number of years. Again, the other thing that's coming forward in the next snap is basically a restriction on the nutrient load on milking platforms. So farmers will have to complete a declaration determining their milking platform stocking rates. It's basically set out to reduce nutrient loading on these farms. If you take this example one, there's some that won't be affected too much if you're relatively lowly stocked on your milking block, but if you're highly stocked on your milking block, there will be a significant amount of slurry having to be exported through to basically out farms. And again, the 4-day rule will apply for that. So if you take a look at example one, the farm area is 83 hectares. The grassland area is 75 hectares. The milking platform is 45, and the whole farm stocking rate is 177 kgs of N per hectare. So from his stocking rate at 177, his chemical N allowance is 241 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. That's based off his stocking rate, his whole farm stocking rate. So if we go down and we look at his milking platform stocking rate, so he's in the high band, so it's 106 we're basing it off. So he's 108 cows, multiplied by 106, divided by his milking platform stocking rate, and that gives us 253 kilograms of N per hectare. So if we look in that table below us, he's fallen into the category of 241, which is your red circle, and then your blue circle just below that, he's fallen in there below just below 259. So none of that farmer's slurry will have to be exported on the farm. So all that slurry can go out on the milking platform. So if we look at example 2 here, the particular farmer has 102 cows in band 3, it's 68 hectare farm, grassland area of 55 hectares, a milking platform area of 18 hectares, and the whole farm stocking rate is 219 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. So based on his stocking rate, based on that particular farmer's stocking rate, they're falling into 214 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. And as you can see, just in table 16 below you, that 214, his milking platform stocking rate is pushing him into that above 319 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. So at least 75% of this farmer's slurry will have to be exported off the milking platform, just because he's highly stocked on his milking platform. He's stocked at around 4+ on his milking platform. So there's a high nutrient load in there from his cows. So a lot of that slurry needs to be exported off it. So just a very, very quick checklist for 2026 for farmers is to analyze their current farm situation and make plans for 2026 and beyond. Get your advisor to walk the farm, complete an NMP, and act accordingly to the findings. So whether that's putting in a new tank, whatever means necessary to make yourself compliant. Consult your advisor on tank suitability. Do you need a soil water tank versus a slurry tank? Look at how dirty yards or soil water collection can be minimized. Essentially, a yard work during that close period, a yard where cows are walking on is a dirty yard. That nutrient basic, or that dung from them cows needs to be collected. So it does, and when you take rainfall and everything into account, there's a significant increase in storage requirements if you have a lot of dirty yards on farms. Know your fertilizer allowance. That goes without saying. A breach in terms of your chemical nitrogen or P is automatic removal from derogation. And know exactly where your farm will be when these new regulations come in, and ultimately what we're trying to achieve is to future-proof the farm. So that's everything, Brendan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ronan, there for that brilliant presentation. I'll get you just to stop sharing your presentation with us there. So at this stage of the evening, we just have about 15 minutes there left for questions and answers. So Dean, at this stage, I'll invite my colleague Pádraig Welch there from Teagasc and Ballina there to start turning on his camera there. And good evening, Pádraig, to you. And just I suppose, again, just a reminder there to our listeners this evening, a lot of farmers on this evening, over 100 farmers tuned in this evening. So still time to put your questions in there for Ronan and Damien. And indeed, I'll ask Damien to come back on as well there. Damien, if we can get you just to come back on our screens again. And at this stage, Pádraig, I'll now hand it over to you. So good evening, Pádraig.
Good evening, Brendan. Thanks very much. Yeah, there's a good scatter of questions here. I've some of them written down here already, and I'm just going to maybe throw a few to you, Damien, just to give Ronan a chance there. First one, I think you may have covered this, but the question: if they don't have lesions, does this mean they don't have TB?
No, it doesn't. As I said there, the lesions are at an end stage in the disease process, and that can go on. That'll be a minimum of 4 months to develop, and could possibly be longer. So the lesions are at an end stage. As I said, about 40% of skin reactors would have lesions. 20% of blood reactors have lesions, and that's because we're taking out the blood reactors earlier generally. But the presence of lesions does not is not needed for confirmation. The presence of lesions is not needed to say they have TB.
Yeah, or I suppose the absence of lesions. Yeah, I know what you're saying. There's two related questions here as well. How do you protect your cattle from badgers if you have a set on your farm, an established set on your farm? How do you protect your cattle from the badgers in that set?
Yeah, like as I said there, and the modelling from the University of Wageningen is showing that this is quite an important thing that individual farmers can do to protect their herds. And what this means in simple terms is fencing off sets, and this is not so much to keep badgers in, but to keep cattle back from grazing the area in the immediate vicinity of the set, because that area is laden with the urine and the feces from the badgers, and that has that's where we fear that there's a possibility of cross-contamination and infection being established. So we'd suggest keeping back about 2 meters from there. We suggest as well that water troughs are raised so that the badgers can't access them, because particularly now, I know this part of the country we don't suffer from droughts that often, but on occasion we do. In dry weather in particular, they would go for the water trough, so higher water troughs that they can't access, and avoid feeding concentrates or nuts on the ground. Again, they now, the other thing is that badgers are quite anyone that's feeding maize in a yard situation, if the yard could be made badger proof, but the other thing to be aware of is the like of maize. Badgers are very, very keen on maize, probably the like of the Steelers grains, those kind of feeds that may be stored in a kind of a pit, so they need to be protected as well.
The related question I had is just, is it safe to zero graze a field adjacent to a badger set?
That's something that we don't know for sure yet, but we've enough evidence to be concerned. And like typically the zero grazing occurs on land that's used for silage purposes on the shoulders of the year, and that zero grazing, like the difference between silage and fresh grass from zero grazing is that silage, the incident process will reduce the pH and will kill off the in bovis bacteria. Whereas if this is being fed fresh, you could have grass contaminated. And so what we recommend is people stay back about 2 meters from a known badger set and discard that grass for zero grazing purposes, because that's high risk. That's a high risk feed.
Okay, and there's some related questions coming in there as well in relation to, should the area around badger sets not be sterilized or disinfected around badger sets? Or that was another question.
Yeah.
There's a question. Can I ask you this one as well, Damien? It's well, maybe it's more of a business question. Do you have to pay a tax on the money you receive for animals that go down with TB at the end of the year? Now, maybe that's not your area, even though you still had it, even though your herd is not still TB clear, because you can't buy in stock in that year. So I suppose people that have got money, compensation money for the sale of animals, they can't buy in animals. They're wondering, do they have to pay tax on it? Maybe no, that's
that's not in my area. I'd say that's more of an accountancy issue.
yeah, fair enough. I'll throw a few over to Ronan now there. Ronan, what percentage of derogation farmers are inspected annually? That was the first question that came in there.
Yeah, around 10% pork are inspected on an annual basis.
Those are, Clatera questions for you. The ICBF nitrates calculator, is it available to everyone, or is there a fee? You had it there in your presentation, I think.
Yeah, you must be a Herd Plus member to avail of it. But it's very useful, and in terms of what Herd Plus gives you from a recording point of view, paying that membership, it's excellent value for money, and it's a no-brainer for farmers, and it's very, very useful for calculating that for using that nitrates calculator to work out your own relevant stocking rate for a particular year.
There's a related question there as well. Does the 100 kilos organic in per hectare relate to just cattle, or does it include sheep or horses?
Yeah, it includes all animals. Yeah, if you go over that 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, you need to be able to have sufficient storage for all the animals on the whole, including sheep and horses.
Good stuff. Another question for derogation farmers: why no ploughing of grassland? I presume, why is there no ploughing of grassland after the 31st of May? And the follow on from that is, can you reseed in the autumn in this case?
You can reseed in the autumn, but it's minimum cultivation. There's no ploughing on it allowed. I suppose one of the major reasons for it is just to reduce the risk of losses of potential losses of nitrogen and phosphorus on the farm.
Thanks, Ronan. I might throw another one back at you, Damien, if that's okay.
Yeah.
There's a question here. Does TB spread in raw milk if it overflows out of a milk tanker in your yard?
No. I don't think that's anything to be really concerned about.
Okay. Another question for you. If you had an incident of TB, what is the percentage risk of reoccurrence in the following years, given continued high local incidence?
There's a lot of ifs in that question, and if you're looking at a high local instance, and I'm assuming a relatively large breakdown. A lot of this, the recurrence probably is more to do with what's going on within the herd than within the area, and it's probably the recurrence is probably related to a residual infection, and within 1 year, if there's a breakdown, you could be looking at quite a high risk within the first year of say failing the first 6-month check test, and high, I'd say probability maybe 1 in 3, and now that all depends. Like the bigger the breakdown, the greater the probability of, and the longer it's going on for, the greater the probability of a recurrence.
Okay.
But there isn't a simple answer to that question, but
Okay.
there's a lot of ifs, or a lot of variables to consider.
lot of areas to consider. Another question there, is very specific. Is badger culling going to be brought in to help resolve TB?
Well, it's in, and it's been in since over 20 years. And last year we culled about 7,500 badgers, and we've been culling for the last 10 years. We culled 6,000 per annum.
Okay.
An average of about 6,000 per annum.
There's a question here as well in relation to vaccination of badgers.
Yes.
Is there vaccination of badgers?
Oh yes,
Sorry, no,
we have a vaccine program. That's last year we've been capturing between vaccination and culling, we've been capturing between 13 and 14,000 per annum for the last 2 years. We've been capturing about the 14,000, about half of those for vaccination.
Okay, and the final question in this round here, just a question: should the area around badger sets not be sterilized, disinfected against disease spread?
Well, you won't do that on an ongoing basis in any sort of a meaningful way. Like you'd want to be going out with lime every day, no more than you'd be going out bed in cubicles. I like we haven't put that to the test, but I think our view would be more practical for just to keep cattle back from grazing it.
Okay. Another question for you, Ronan. Is the 60% grant for all farmers or only young farmers?
So yeah, the 60% grant is for all farmers. So all farmers now have a 90,000 ceiling at 60% under the nutrient storage scheme. And then all farmers then have a further 90,000. So you can get the tank, slats and slab at up to 90,000 at a 60% rate of grant aid. And then you can go and put a tank or a shed over it. You have another 90,000 euro ceiling there to put the shed over it, basically, and depending on whether you're a young farmer or just a normal farmer outside of that threshold, or a women farmer, that grant then is available at 40 or 60%. For the nutrient storage scheme, that's available to all farmers at 60% of a 90,000 ceiling.
Thanks, Ronan. Another question there. It says, what is the issue with greater than 14% protein rations in summertime?
So basically, the view on it is that there is enough protein in the grass, and that level of protein. So a lot of it is produced from soya, and basically because the protein is so high in the grass, that level of protein is not required, and cows should be able to get enough energy from protein in the diet through grazed grass, and that's why it's there for the majority of the mid-season, and why it's not there at the shoulders of the year.
Okay. Another question coming in here. How do you get TB after 50 years clear with no animals bought in 10 years and no neighbours with TB? That's a particular scenario, I suppose, Damien.
Well, that's a particular scenario that needs a particular familiarity with its context, and I'm not familiar with the context, so I think I'd be given a very theoretical answer, and there's more to that question than meets the eye. So I don't know the context, so I'm not in a position to give an answer.
There's another question, a possible final question there. I'm conscious of the time now, but a question there in relation to the linkage between deer, deer and bovines.
Yeah. You would have noticed that I said for the most part we're dealing with TB in a two-host system. But in particular areas we've established in County Wicklow in particular that it's a three-host system where we've got deer involved in this as well. And we've whole genome sequencing to show that there's the same strain occurring in badgers, cattle and deer. Now, the particular context in Wicklow is that there's a huge density of deer in Wicklow, and that's really driving it. Now, we don't have the same evidence from other parts of the country. There's anecdotal reports, all right, but we don't have the same evidence, the whole genome sequencing, and we're keen to investigate this further. But I think the key thing in that scenario is the density of the deer in Wicklow. And we don't really want the density of deer to reach those proportions in any other part of the country. And the minister did, in conjunction with the Parks and Wildlife Minister, did launch the deer management strategy, and there's been 15 deer management units established around the country with the view to addressing the increase in deer numbers. Now, there are a variety of reasons of dealing with the surge in deer numbers. That includes biodiversity, forestry, animal health, road traffic. So, like, there's a variety of reasons to deal with deer numbers.
Thanks, Damien. I'm conscious of the time now. There's one or two other questions in, and some of them are specific enough, I suppose, in relation to TB and restricted herds and 6-month rules and stuff like that. So maybe that's something, Brendan, that we'll address. Is it afterwards, or?
Yeah, or if you want to ask it, Pádraig, one last question.
I'll ask the one last question.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one last question. We've had 2 clear tests since the end of October, but received a letter saying that we will have to test again and will be locked up from January until we test. I thought after getting clear, you were clear and open to move for 6 months until you were called for 6-month post de-restriction test.
That kicks in after 3 months. I think people have the opportunity. That will be kicking in after 3 to 4 months.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Look at thank you very much, Pádraig, for handling those questions and answers. And indeed, we're just about out of time this evening. I'd like to thank our 2 panelists very much here this evening. Damien Barrett there, a well-known veterinary surgeon there from County Mayo, and indeed my colleague Ronan Mulligan there from Teagasc in Claremorris. Indeed, thanks to you at home this evening for staying with us, engaging our panelists here tonight, and indeed putting your questions into the Q&A chat this evening. We hope you found this webinar beneficial. We'll get the recording uploaded to the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. All that's left for me to say is that we'll be here again next Tuesday evening for the 3rd episode in this series, where Dylan Gilligan from Teagasc and Ballina will discuss a number of topical flock-related issues, while David Cohn from Sheep Ireland will be with us to give us an update there on upland breeding hill sheep programs there. So that promises to be a very worthwhile event there next Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. So with that, it's good night from us all here in Teagasc and Mayo, and we'll see you all again next Tuesday evening, and good night again, folks. Night.